Welcome to The Explainer. Okay, today we are tackling a topic that touches absolutely every single one of us, yet somehow it usually leaves us feeling completely drained. We're talking about personal growth. You know, if you've spent literally any time on the internet lately, you have undoubtedly been bombarded with endless, glowing advice on how to optimize your existence and be a better person. But let's be real for a second. Half the time, trying to be a better person just makes you actively dislike yourself. It can feel like this insurmountable mountain of expectations. So today, we are going to explore a completely different approach based on some fascinating new research. We're going to look at how to genuinely grow, improve, and connect with others, but without that heavy burden of self-hatred weighing you down.
Okay, let's dive into this. Wake up at 5 a.m. Drink a gallon of water. Manifest your dream life before you even brew your morning coffee. When you stack it all up like this, it is fundamentally exhausting. The internet has basically gamified human existence into this relentless barrage of daily optimizations. You read these standard self-help mandates, and you immediately feel behind schedule, right? You haven't meditated, your hydration is way off, your manifestations are lagging. It's just a dizzying treadmill of expectations that leaves most of us completely overwhelmed before we've even tied our shoes.
And all of that overwhelm leads us exactly here. By treating personal growth like a relentless daily checklist of extreme habits, we've accidentally turned self-improvement into a side hustle that you're failing at. Really think about that for a second. It's no longer about just being a decent human being. It feels like an exhausting second job with a terrible boss, and spoiler alert, that boss is you. When every single day is measured by this impossible standard of productivity and spiritual optimization, burnout isn't just a possibility, it's an absolute guarantee. Your exhaustion is totally valid.
But what if we completely rewrite the rules? What if being a better person just isn't a to-do list? What if we've been approaching this entire concept from the absolute wrong angle? Instead of adding more tasks, more pressure, and more rigid structures to our already crazy busy lives, what if becoming better is actually about changing the lens through which we view that list in the very first place? Let's take a collective breath right now and shift our paradigm away from the checklist entirely.
The first and absolutely most critical shift we need to make involves a fundamental contrast. We have to abandon perfection for direction. Look, the goal of life is not to become some flawless Zen-like guru who floats above the ground, never ever experiences a moment of anger, and completely avoids junk food. Striving for that is just a direct recipe for self-hatred, mostly because it's literally impossible. Instead, you've got to focus entirely on direction. Are you just slightly kinder today than you were yesterday? A fraction more patient, a tiny bit more curious? It is never about reaching a final, flawless destination. It's simply about taking one small, manageable step in a better direction every single day.
So let's see how this builds into actionable steps. Step 1. Practice curiosity, not judgment.
You see, our brains are essentially natural-born judgment machines. Biologically, this makes total sense. Forming quick judgments is a mental shortcut that helps us rapidly make sense of a chaotic world. But in our modern social lives, it's incredibly lazy. When someone does something we disagree with, our brain's immediate, effortless default is to slap a label on them. They're rude, they're inconsiderate, they are entirely wrong. To counter this lazy default, we need to shift from being the judge to being the detective. The judge is angry, reactionary, and hands down sentences immediately. The detective, on the other hand, is curious, observant, and empathetic. The next time you feel that flash of annoyance at someone, try forcing yourself to use this specific phrase. I wonder what's going on in their life that led them to do that. Notice how that immediately changes your physical reaction. It doesn't excuse toxic or bad behavior for sure, but it brilliantly disconnects you from that spike of immediate anger and builds a real bridge to empathy.
Which brings us perfectly to step 2. Listen to understand, not to reply.
Think about your last few conversations. Like, really think about them. How often were you actually truly listening to the other person? And how often were you simply waiting for your turn to talk? Hey, we all do it. We sit there formulating our brilliant counter-argument, preparing some unasked-for advice, or queuing up a funny story that relates back to us. But true listening is a rare and incredible gift. It requires actively silencing your own internal monologue to make space for someone else to feel genuinely heard. If you want a super practical way to fix this, try to summarize what the other person said before you share your own thoughts. It forces you to actually digest their words, it proves to them that they are seen and heard, and it proves to you that the conversation is about mutual understanding, not just a competition to see who can sound the most clever. Applying this one simple technique changes the entire dynamic of human interaction.
Moving right along to step 3. And honestly, this is a big one. Learn to apologize properly.
We've all been on the receiving end of a terrible apology. You know the ones. I'm sorry if you were offended. Or the absolute classic, I'm sorry, but... Listen, these are not apologies. These are defensive maneuvers entirely focused on the person speaking, serving only to protect their ego and subtly shift the blame back onto the person who is hurt. So the crucial point is exactly what's captured here. A real apology is about the other person. It is not a magical get-out-of-jail-free card. It's not a tactic for escaping the doghouse so you can just go back to watching television. A genuine apology is about looking the other person in the eye, acknowledging the actual impact your behavior had on their life, and showing them that you respect them enough to own it and do better.
Let's systematically break down the exact mechanics of how to do this correctly, because there is actually a flawless three-part framework for this. First, I'm sorry for the specific action. Name exactly what you did. No vague generalities allowed here. Second, I understand that it made you feel, and actually name their emotion. Validate their experience. Third, in the future, I will, and then specify the behavioral change. It's that simple. You acknowledge the fault, you validate the pain, and you provide the roadmap for prevention. That right there is how you rebuild trust.
All right, next is step 4. Embrace the power of being wrong.
From a very young age, society conditions us to believe that being wrong is a fundamental weakness. We're taught to defend our positions at all costs, to never back down lest we look foolish. But we need to completely flip that script. Being wrong isn't a weakness. It is a superpower. When you're wrong, it means you're teachable. It means the boundaries of your knowledge are expanding. And this brilliantly illustrates that idea. Every time you admit you are wrong, you're upgrading. You aren't losing a battle. You are upgrading your entire understanding of the world around you. Think about how much confidence it takes to look at someone and say, you know what? Actually, I hadn't thought of it that way. You're right. It is the ultimate sign of inner strength and self-assurance. Only incredibly secure people have the capacity to happily admit when they are incorrect.
Finally, we arrive at step 5, invisible acts of integrity. This shifts the focus entirely away from interpersonal conflict and onto what you do when absolutely no one is watching. We're talking about returning the shopping cart to the corral instead of just abandoning it in the parking space. It's about bending down to pick up a stray piece of trash on the sidewalk or leaving a really generous tip for a stressed-out server. Why are these invisible acts so vital? Because they are quiet promises to yourself. They aren't filmed for social media. You don't get a medal, you don't get public praise, and no one is going to validate you for them. And that is exactly what makes them the true building blocks of your character. Doing the right thing when there is zero external reward lowers the stakes of self-improvement and proves to you and only you the kind of person you are actively choosing to be.
As we bring all these steps together, I want you to remember this fundamental distinction. Being a better person is not a project to be completed. It is a practice to be lived. If it weren't a project, there'd be a finish line, and you would constantly feel like you're failing to cross it. But because it's a practice, it is naturally forgiving. Let me assure you right now, you will fail. You will have days where you are deeply judgmental. You will make mistakes, and you know what? That is perfectly fine. True growth is a forgiving daily practice, not a rigid project.
The goal was never to be perfect. The goal is simply to be a little better tomorrow than you were today. And that entire journey doesn't start with some grand, sweeping gesture or a 5 a.m. alarm.